Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox. This week, we're covering everything that went wrong at Boeing, why you should worry about AI blabbing your work secrets, the dark ugliness of Abercrombie's former CEO being charged with sex trafficking, and Florida man's successful heist of $100,000 worth of frozen bacon. But first, how's your week been, Tom? And what do you think has been the most interesting development?
Well, first I have to shout out to the Two Gurus in Compliance podcast. This is our episode number 40.
Ooh, well done, us.
And as much as it pains me, I have to shout out to your Los Angeles Dodgers
We're doing pretty
for
well.
winning the World Series and reminding us, actually, the New York Yankees reminded us that no matter how high a level of baseball you play, it's really just like Little League. Because the Yankees had a 3-error fifth inning in Game 5 that allowed Los Angeles to come back and tie the game down 5 runs. And, we're just big kids out there playing a game.
You know, I am here right now in New York City, and it was Halloween last night, which was absolute madness. For the record, it was as nuts as you'd imagine. But overall, the New Yorkers did a pretty sedate job of, taking the loss. So thank you, New York. Tom, where are we going to start?
Well, we're going to start with a continuing topic, and that's Boeing. And we're going to do this because the Wall Street Journal wrote a really long article about, I think it was entitled, What Went Wrong at Boeing? And when the WSJ goes into a deep dive on cultural issues, I think it's worth shouting out because their reporting is always great. But they ended the piece by something I think we've explicitly discussed, which is Boeing too big to fail? I have maintained it is. And it's too important to the United States. It's too to the United States government, to the United States economy, and really to sort of the gestalt of the U.S. Because if we don't have Boeing, we don't have the world's top airplane manufacturer. It goes to Airbus. And we could certainly break up Boeing. Standard Oil got broken up over 100 years ago, and it became 7 of the greatest oil companies in the world. But if we break up Boeing, I think it will be a completely different can of worms. We have to get this right. And that's why I called on the court and the Department of Justice and Boeing to all collaborate in getting a massive monitorship, which would cover multiple areas of Boeing's failure, starting with culture. And so when the Wall Street Journal starts talking about too big to fail, I hope that will really move the conversation forward. I recognize, Boeing's in the middle of a terrible strike. They're losing orders. Customers, i.e. airline companies are complaining they can't get the planes they want and need. It's a complete, total, and utter mess. But in the middle of that, I want to shout out to the new CEO of Boeing because he did one thing that, to me, said more than anything. Boeing, 20 years or 30 years ago, moved its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago, and they separated the corporate headquarters from the manufacturing headquarters. He moved back to Seattle. And he said, if you're a Boeing exec, you need to be in Seattle. And so I applaud him just for that. And maybe that's the first step, Kristy, just something that simple is we're going to be where the workforce is. So it is too big to fail. We can't let it fail. The DOJ, Boeing, the court, everybody has to work. The FAA, every agency in addition to the DOJ. So I just wanted to, one, shout out to the Wall Street Journal for their great reporting. 2, it is too big to fail. And let's have this conversation literally across the nation.
The article has many damning details about all of the culture breakdowns and places where people truly purposefully ignored safety concerns. And I think that when you read it in that light, it really is a very scary piece of work. And the end of the article really does go into the yin and yang about its current terrible financial circumstances and how long that will last. But they also wonder whether things like the space program pieces can be broken off. But I agree with you, Tom. when is a company actually too big to fail? And something like this, I suppose you have a really good point that if it goes somewhere else, that would it be successful? I mean, if you take the airline business to your point, take the airline business and you sell it to someone else and you still have it as an American manufacturer, can that shift it faster than the monitors can?
So I hope we continue this conversation. I'm sure two gurus will continue this conversation. What do you have for us next, Kristy?
All right, I wanted to start with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is otherwise known as the CFPB. It issued a stark reminder for companies' HR and IT folks, as well as compliance, that getting all gung-ho about using AI in your people management may be a problem. You need to be careful because people actually do, even in America, have rights, and your company's surveillance may be violating them. So the review comes from the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled U.S. Consumer Watchdog Cautions Businesses on Surveillance of Workers. So companies are increasingly using artificial intelligence-driven software to do all kinds of creepy things. Some examples brought up in the article include going to an interview with AI instead of a human. Assessing the likelihood that workers might help to organize a union, probing their social media activity, or estimating the probability that a worker will leave the job. In their new guidance, the CFPB reminded companies that employees have the right to consent to the collection of this personal information. They can also receive detailed information about this collection and dispute inaccurate information. I was wondering, why is the CFPB giving guidance on AI in employment? And it's because the new invasive, their word, tools to monitor workers are governed by a law designed to ensure fairness in credit reporting. Interesting. Giving employees specific rights. All right. So what do you think about all of these employee surveillance tools, Tom? I mean, we at Spark Compliance have turned them all off, including those that are already inherent in the Microsoft system. I have friends and family members whose jobs track what they're doing to the point where if they're typing, there's a green light. If they're at their desk but not typing, it turns yellow. God forbid you be reading something. And a red light if they aren't at their desk. So, I mean, in my opinion, this is freaking creepy and shows zero respect for workers. And I think that these surveillance activities will probably lead to culture problems and distrust. But I'm curious about your thoughts on this.
Well, I'm certainly sensitive and supportive of those points you raised, Kristy. On the other hand, if someone is using off-channel communications to facilitate a bribery and corruption scheme or fraud scheme, or using code words in email, and that's going on, and you've turned off your tracking devices so that you can't read emails, your company's going to be held responsible for those. So there has to be some medium, this keystroke. We're going to count your keystrokes. You can't do that to people. You're a professional. The people who work with you are professionals. If I was a CCO and I wanted to bounce something off you or Ellen Hunt, I'd pick up the phone and call you guys and go, well, Tom, here's what I think based on what you told me. Or you might say, I need more information. And that would never be recorded by these tools. So it's ridiculous unless you're going to make people put everything down with a keystroke. So there's some balance here. But I remember in the 80s when privacy was, could you look in someone's desk? Was it a reasonable privacy expectation that if your desk was closed, your employer couldn't open it? So we've had these discussions for a long, long time, but they're getting to a level where you're right. It's creeping people out. And you and I would never work at a place like that. And I hope, no, but there may be places that do that. So I guess I'm still on a conundrum here. There's got to be some happy medium or at least a balanced medium, but I don't know what it is at this point.
I certainly think that being able to search email for keywords is rather different than checking out every single minute and calculating how much time people are spending at their desk versus typing. I mean, I need thinking time. I write things out by hand. I'm pretty sure I'd be fired for that. And if I were interviewing with AI, I think I'd immediately click off this interview. So it's a hot, crazy new world out there, but the CFPB is watching. So be aware of what you're doing.
Kristy, our next story, I can't say I'm happy about this ending, perhaps bittersweet, because it was a horrible miscarriage of justice that got demi-remedied. And that is a Binance compliance officer, not the chief compliance officer, but a compliance professional at Binance, and a colleague went to Nigeria ostensibly to meet with Nigerian officials about compliance issues, and they were both arrested. And one of them was an American, Tigran Gambaran, and he literally was thrown in jail for 9 months. And like I said, a complete miscarriage of justice. The trumped up charge by Nigeria was Binance owed back taxes. And he was in such detention that his health deteriorated, and he was basically given compassionate leave to leave Nigeria so that they could take care of his health issues. I know you travel some internationally. I don't travel too much internationally anymore. But this story just says it doesn't matter who you are, who you work for, what your job is. If a government wants to throw you in jail on trumped up charges, they'll do it. And this is not China or Russia. This is Nigeria. So I found this to be an incredibly disheartening story. He was a compliance person and completely unrelated to the charges, valid or not. And it was a horrible case. I'm glad he's out, but I'm somewhat bittersweet because it took the destruction of his health to get out.
It's a terrifying story, honestly. I mean, it reminds me of some of the stories that we've talked about, China, Russia, Venezuela, where people really get taken to jail when they get there. And I do travel internationally. I've been now at, I think, 65 countries. I'm about to be in my 7th continent. And it's a very uncomfortable story. And I think it's especially bothersome because Mr. Gabion was part of a team that previously, he was part of an IRS audit team, and he took down some of the child sex abuse rings and the dark money exchanges, Silk Road. So we certainly hope that he comes back soon. He has been pardoned essentially by the court and allowed to go home, but he isn't here now. So may he come home quickly. We're really hoping that he does.
You've got another story about kind of AI culture at the workplace.
Yeah, it was really a theme for me this week, to be fair. But this one was...
Go Dodgers.
Yeah, right. I like this article so much. I chose it, and I literally sent this to my entire team of consultants, because if you're looking for some great stories to scare people at work about the dangers of AI that don't include frightening, machines take over, look no further than the article in the Washington Post titled "AI Assistants Are Blabbing Our Embarrassing Work Stories." So this isn't the end of the world. This is what the heck are you doing at work? So if you live on planet Earth and work in an office, you've almost certainly seen the note-taker persona appear in virtual meetings. Now, this friendly AI assistant is here to take notes, summarize action items, and record important points. Useful, but sometimes it goes horribly wrong. So the article starts with the story of Alex Bilzerian. And after a Zoom meeting with some venture capitalists, he got an automated email from Otter AI, which is a transcription service or AI meeting assistant. The email contained a transcript of the entire meeting, including the part that happened after he logged off, where the investors discussed their firm's strategic failures and cooked metrics. The article included tales of people who jumped off of meetings only to have the transcript sent to them after the meeting, which in at least one case included coworkers talking smack about the people who had just left. Otter AI and other services stress that companies need to check the settings of the transcribing and summarizing services. Very important that they can be customized so people only get the summaries of the parts of the meeting that they attended. Automatic recordings can also be a big issue as well. One executive's recorded meeting was automatically uploaded to the company's public server, as was the protocol. Since the purpose of that meeting was to decide who would get laid off, this was ever so awkward. So I've said it before, Tom, I have hung up on calls with people when they can't or won't turn off their AI assistants to capture everything because I find it too dangerous. How should compliance people be handling this when everyone wants to turn on the AI without thinking through it carefully?
Well, this topic really doesn't bother me too much,
Really?
at least until I read this article.
Right.
And I had no idea that something like this could go on, but this could be a huge problem. Um, we're both lawyers, so we think about privilege. We think about all of those things in addition to the reputational and egg on your face that can happen from something like this. Um, I have worked as a lawyer in areas where everything was recorded, and I handled trading cases back in the 90s, energy trading, and there was always a recording. So I'm used to that, and I'm used to hearing and seeing that. Maybe that's why it doesn't bother me that much. But this really is disturbing. I can see the legal imbroglios. I can see the reputational problems, and kind of like North Korea hacking Sony and talking about the intimate conversations of the CEO in public. Nobody wants that. So they better get this fixed.
Fun fact, Tom, I was part of the Sony hack.
I think you've mentioned that before.
I was working at United International Pictures at the time as their chief compliance officer, and that's the joint venture of Paramount and Universal, but we also had Sony as some of our countries. So it was quite good fun to realize I was part of that giant hack. Luckily, no interesting information whatsoever came out of my email, so there we go.
Let me just give a free piece of advice to our listeners. Do not put any details of your intimate life, whatever that might be, in an email, period. So
good reminder. I work with my husband. It would be a good idea for me to remember that all the time. So all right, what have we got? Well, speaking of AI, we're keeping on our theme
speaking
here.
Of AI. And so here's the question I really wanted to use this article. And the article is OpenAI hires their first ethics and compliance chief. Here's the question I really want to pose to you based on this article. Maybe give me the top 3 companies that if they called you tomorrow and said, we want you to come be our E&C chief, you'd leave Spark Consulting for. Are there any? Are there any challenges in the corporate world that would be so great that you would go, let me think about that?
I don't know. I really like consulting. So it would be very difficult for me to actually go back, I think, to that. But I mean, OpenAI is a pretty fascinating one, right? So I can see why the challenges there are so interesting.
Yeah. And that's, I just thought, what could be, I mean, Boeing, obviously would be a big challenge
I'd
right
like
now.
to sleep at night. I don't want to be at Boeing all the time. Yeah.
And maybe there's one or two others. TD Bank America comes to mind. But this to me is one of the most fascinating ones that if you got that call, OpenAI, ChatGPT, iterative AI, one of the most fascinating companies from a governance structure because of their 2-tiered approach of a private company, a nonprofit company owning a for-public company. You have the top, and you can't have a better investor or a more top investor than Microsoft and some of the other people. I just think this one would be perhaps one of the most fascinating jobs, literally from every angle. You may never sleep if you had this job, but I just thought kudos for the guy who took this job. Kudos finally to OpenAI for hiring an E&C chief. And these types of jobs obviously don't come up very often, but they present some of the greatest challenges that people in our profession could face. And if you have the opportunity to step up and be a part of those, I would hope you'd consider it.
Yes, congratulations to them. I'm a little bit surprised it took them this long, considering just how big a company it is and how many ethics issues are clearly implicit in all of the things that ChatGPT can do. Thinking about your question, I might take one of the crazy crypto roles. You picked the hard companies in the corporate space. I don't know, some of those crazy crypto things where things go horribly wrong, and it's fascinating to try to manage that. I'm not qualified for it, but I could think about it.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, Tom. We are recording this on Dia de los Muertos, November 1st, but it will be published today. But guess what? Monday is one of the greatest days of the year. Why? It's the beginning of Compliance and Ethics Week. Congratulations, our fellow professionals. It's the annual celebration of all things compliance and ethics. And while some companies celebrate during different weeks and some don't celebrate at all, I say that we should celebrate ourselves no matter what. So if you're trying to stage a fun Compliance and Ethics Week, sometimes that's tough. We at Spark Compliance help our clients with it all the time, but it's not just us who come up with creative ideas. My next article is written by The Broadcat, and it's titled 4 Great Ideas for Your Compliance and Ethics Week. Now, the article starts out with warnings to avoid dumb games or things that don't contribute to people understanding compliance, but smart games are good. So my favorite of their 4 ideas was creating a photo of a desk with lots of problematic things like open confidential files and fancy gift baskets with a thank you note from a supplier. He also said that you should have some red herrings like a green turtle and see if people pick up on that and make up stories for what the green turtle means when it's clearly not a red flag. He wants employees to identify the red flags, and then if you have ties, to have a prize draw for who gets the prizes. What do you think of Compliance and Ethics Weeks, Tom? What do you think makes them effective?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. It's a week of celebration, but it's really become a sophisticated approach that many compliance professionals, CCOs, and compliance functions are using as a starting point or a jumping off point, literally for the entire year. I think early on, Compliance Week was seen as sort of a 1 week and done. Well, now many companies are planning their years, the calendar years, compliance initiatives around Compliance Week, where they do get to introduce those. And the creativity, as you would guess, is only limited by the imaginations of the compliance professionals engaging in them. I've seen avatars, I've seen playing cards, I've seen videos. Ronnie Feldman does a lot of work around this area. Companies do trainings, companies do Jeopardy games, companies do talk shows. Corporate executives get out. It's just, we're, like I said, only limited by our imagination. But the key is to use it as a jumping off point and use it as a starting point for what you might want to do. So you can have a day on third parties. You can have a day on conflicts of interest. You can have a day on reporting. You can have a day on off-channel communications. But the key is to follow that up. And so I really like the approach by Broadcat. We have some good friends over there that we've known for a long time, and they're really one of the leaders in engaging communications in compliance. And so use it as a way to celebrate, but also as a jumping off point or starting point for your entire year's compliance initiatives.
I love it. All right. The UK has a, in my mind, quite controversial new law. Why don't you tell us about it, Tom?
Well, and I have to say, after reading your notes for this point, I'm really more intrigued with your thoughts on it. But what the UK basically said is that we want sexual harassment stopped at work, no problem there, but we want it done on a preventative basis or preventing bad behavior before it occurs. And as a compliance professional, prevent, detect, and remediate are the 3 bywords I've used for 15 years. And so I see nothing wrong and indeed embrace moving from detect to prevent. But how do we implement this? How do we get people to not say stupid things? And here I'm raising my hand as a guy of the world. Don't say stupid things, guys. But it's more than just a policy and procedure. You actually see some real risks or dangers in this. And so I really was intrigued to hear your thoughts on why you think this well-intentioned law change or regulatory change may actually be harmful.
So this law puts the onus on the company to prevent this. But what it does is it's what I see it doing is trying to impose culture change. And that's really difficult. What you need is management and tone from the top imposing culture change. And you need people held accountable for when sexual harassment happens. And you need stories of it to go to people so that they understand that there are consequences to this. And you need modeling of good behavior and bystander training so that people know when to intervene. To me, those are the things that need to happen. And I understand the UK is trying to do that. But it's so heavy-handed in the way that it's handled that really, look, I lived in London for 9 years. I lived in Big Law. I dated a finance bro for about 3 months. So I'm not pretending that these folks don't sometimes earn their reputations. But honestly, I think this can have the opposite effect of leading to people maybe not wanting to take women on overnight trips for work trips, or having a higher risk. Certainly the alcohol culture in the UK is quite strong, especially because in London there's public transit everywhere and there's not the questions of drinking and driving. And so I think that it does create situations that are ripe for problems. But I do worry that sometimes it puts people in a position where it's just easier to bring men with you if you are already a man, or women with you if you're already a woman. And I think that can be counterproductive. So I applaud the UK's intention in this law. I think that focus on culture and prevention is better, but I'm not sure that this is the right way to do it.
So years ago, I heard Billy Graham, or read an article about Billy Graham, and this was 80s or 90s. And he said he is never alone with a woman, period. There was always another woman present. And Mike Pence actually had that same policy.
Right.
And he was heavily criticized for it, for exactly the points you raised. It's like, you are the vice president of the United States. You're a mentor. You're a leader. You're a person that women must interact with on a professional basis. And it is completely unfair to cut off half the gender of the world because you don't want to get in trouble. And his point was, I don't want to be accused of anything. But that doesn't solve the problem that you just articulated, that you have to mentor, you have to discuss, you have to engage in professional conversations. Now, at night, on the road, when you're traveling, guess what? That's where real mentorship occurs. Over dinner, over drinks, in my case, over a cup of coffee. And if you're going to lose that, we're going to lose the way we have mentored for years. So you raise some really good points here. And if the response is the Billy Graham, Mike Pence approach, it's really going to hurt the person who's the gender opposite of the mentor.
Yeah, I remember reading that Mike Pence thing and getting very angry about it, and feeling like there were a couple of partners at my law firm that I felt like I was not given some opportunities because they were uncomfortable with having a young woman around. And I knew that because it wasn't just me. And I don't think that they were purposely trying to, discriminate against women or didn't want me on their cases, but it was a problem when it came to big overnight trips or traveling internationally. And, that may be just the nature of some of this, but I think the UK may be maybe not handling it exactly the right way.
Well, we may continue to watch this one, Kristy.
We will indeed. Okay. Let's keep talking about young people here. So my next article is from Inc. magazine, and it's titled, "Why So Many Gen Zers Are Fit to Quit." So this article separates frontline Gen Z workers, which I thought was interesting, from managerial Gen Z workers. The Gen Zers on the front line are an unhappy bunch, with 83% of them self-describing as burned out. 71% of them say that they have negative interactions with managers, coworkers, or customers, which is much higher than the average of 59% of all frontline employees. What can we do about this? Well, there are some relatively simple changes. So one survey found that Gen Zers prioritize greater work-life balance and more flexible work schedules over better compensation. So flexible schedules, the self-choice of hours, which I'm a big fan of, and the ability to work share are all ways to make the frontline Gen Zers happier. As we know, happier employees are easier to retain, which is always better for the company. So Tom, I read this and I wondered how much of this burned out feeling and negative interaction was due to some of those adjustments from working full-time out of school. So I was thinking about it in my own context. And my first full-time job was actually at Paramount Pictures as an assistant to one of the vice presidents. And the hours were, 60 hours a week and all weekends. And I remember like staring into the abyss and thinking, okay, so now I go to work all day, every day, do that for 45 years, and then I retire. This sucks. And that was a big adjustment, but we kind of get used to it. And this is how life is. Did you experience that? Do you think that's part of this? Or is it truly a generation that's very burned out?
Well, 60 hours a week, then you became a lawyer. What happened then? Uh, my
It felt more
first
like choice at that point.
real job was after law school. So I jumped into it. I went to what was then a big firm in Houston, and that was just the norm. So I did what was expected. And as always, I tried to have the most hours just because I'm a competitive person. Actually, what I wondered about this was, could we tie this back to the monitoring? Because I
Mm,
wondered if it's the frontline Gen Zers who are bearing the brunt of this monitoring the most, not the managers. And if you're being monitored at that level, whether it's at work or physically in the office rather, or at home, whether if there are intrusions into what you think are your private life, um, you're getting calls at 11 p.m. I need this, 6 a.m. tomorrow, that kind of thing. Those sort of what we now consider really abusive managerial tactics. Is that one of the reasons? It took me a long time to get used to being at work at 8. Oh, I have some sympathy to that, but it it's not them, they, or other that's going to have to adjust, Kristy. It's us,
mm.
because they're going to be running this country long after you and I are not working, and they're going to run it their way. And every generation should have that right. And uh, and when I read this, it reminds me how sick I get when someone raises their hand and at some meeting and says, "I'm just tired of these kids that don't want to work." Stop it. They do want to work.
I mean, if the
They
answer
just
is
don't want to work like you.
no, and if the answer is flexibility, well, hallelujah. I mean, that really is, we're talking about women, that really helps women, especially because a lot of times we're caring for parents, caring for children, doing all these things that, my employees have the ability to go pick up kids, come back, and then work after. If you have that kind of flexibility, and that's what they're asking for, it changes the game. So good for them for running things that way. And as they grow into more managerial roles, I hope that they maintain that desire for flexibility. I think it's natural in this day and age, and I hope that they are successful at it.
Our next case to me is just a terribly disgusting case. It is about sexual abuse, sexual harassment, probably bordering onto criminal activity or such as rape or other trafficking issues. And unfortunately, it involves the former CEO, and I want to emphasize former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, Mike Jeffries. And the allegations, I think, as reported by the BBC, who broke this case, was that Jeffries and his longtime partner engaged in basically sex parties with young men who either worked for or wanted to work for Abercrombie and Fitch, and trafficked these young men throughout the UK and the EU. And it turned out that he was doing it in part over 10 years ago, because he left Abercrombie and Fitch in 2014 through Abercrombie and Fitch, or it's at least that's alleged. So he has been charged criminally. We both have friends who work at Abercrombie and Fitch, and this has got to just be horrific for them, particularly those in compliance. But it's a horrific story. And for all the Jeffrey Epsteins in the world doing that to women, turns out there are people doing it to men or boys. And it's equally bad. It's equally wrong. And there's going to be a lot of very negative things come out with this.
Yeah. So I watched the Netflix documentary that it had a lot of these accusations in it, as well as the discrimination, the harassment accusations. I think it was called White Hot. But it was really, that was disturbing enough. This article was much more disturbing. And it had a lot to do, I think, similarly with the Sean Combs allegations as well. So if anything good comes out of it, I think there'll be much more sensitivity to, these kinds of things, especially in sexy industries like music, like modeling, like clothing, those types of places where there's a lot more vulnerability, and a lot more younger people involved. So hopefully, as we continue to see the rise of compliance, this will help mitigate some of this risk and make it a safer place for people who are in those industries.
So what about our friend Florida Man?
Florida
Has he
Man.
done anything stupid lately?
No, not at all.
No?
Wait, no, that's not true. All right, so a Florida man tried to bring home the bacon, but his plot sizzled out pretty quickly. Florida man Marcus Gonzalez Bernal was seriously craving pork when he drove his blue SUV to Daytona Beach. Surveillance footage showed him parking next to a 53-foot-long trailer, then hitching it to his car and driving off. There was $100,000 of frozen bacon in his pig haul. That's a 192-pound haul of the belly of the beast. He was caught in Miami-Dade when a license plate reader identified the SUV as associated with the crime. The semi-trailer was eventually found, but there is no word on whether the bacon was recovered. Mr. Gonzalez Bernal is being held on a $30,000 bond. He thought he was living high on the hog, but ended up hogtied in legal trouble. Terrible.
God bless Florida Man.
God bless him. All right. Thank you so much for listening to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance. I'm Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox. I can't wait till we get together for episode 41.